Welcome along to episode 4 of this travel vlog. If you haven't seen my previous episodes, the story so far is that I'm on board Royal Caribbean's Ovation of the Seas. I'm on a 4-week cruise across the Pacific Ocean from Vancouver, Canada to Sydney, Australia. So far, we've had one port of call in Seattle, and after that, it's been 5 sea days across the Pacific, traveling 2,645 miles to finally arrive this morning in Lahaina, Maui, in beautiful Hawaii. As I mentioned in a previous episode, the whole 4-week cruise is actually made up of 2 consecutive cruises, otherwise known as a back-to-back cruise. Now this first cruise is basically a 9-day cruise. So for now, we have 2 wonderful days to enjoy Maui before our final day in Honolulu. Friday, 7th of October 2022, just after 7:30 in the morning, and the first sighting of land in 6 days is in view. We have arrived in Maui, anchored off Lahaina, and the tenders are already going ashore. Now, in terms of the tender process, what it means is that we have to use small boats. Essentially, in this case, it's the lifeboats from the ship. Nothing to worry about, perfectly normal. We're not docked at the harbour, so we have to get into the small boats to then get transferred into the harbour in Lahaina. This is quite common in cruising, especially where ports might not have deep enough water or might not have port infrastructure. Also, just some useful information in the event that your cruise ship is scheduled to visit Maui. There are actually 2 ports, so it's important that you're aware of which one you're actually heading towards. So today, as I mentioned, we're anchored off Lahaina. However, the other cruise port is Kahului, which is further to the east. Now that's over near the airport for anybody that might be familiar with that. That is a port where the ship actually docks. Now, in addition to mentioning about the ports on Maui, it might also be useful if you're a first-time visitor to just have some insight into the actual state itself. So essentially, the state of Hawaii is made up of a series of islands. The 4 largest and the most developed and most visited are essentially Hawaii, which is locally referred to as the Big Island. Then there's Maui, which we're on today. There's also Kauai, and then Oahu. Oahu is where Honolulu, the state capital, is located. I've been fortunate enough to have visited Hawaii a couple of times in the past. On those occasions it was land-based trips, and I visited Oahu and Kauai. And it's remained my goal since then to get to visit all 4 of the main islands. So today is a great opportunity to add Maui to that list. When I headed down to board the tender around 9:30, I was so surprised to find that there were no queues. I had been planning to make use of my priority embarkation onto the tender using the key that I mentioned in yesterday's episode, but honestly there was no need for that. The tender ride took about 10 minutes to get to the harbour in Lahaina, arriving to a beautiful sunny day and blue skies. If you've watched my previous episode on my day in Seattle, you'll be aware that generally my preference for days in port is to explore independently rather than an organised shore excursion. Now, it does depend on the location. It does depend if it's someplace that I would feel comfortable doing that. But certainly in Hawaii, that's absolutely something that I was comfortable with. What you're seeing here is footage of Banyan Tree Park, which is just about 2 minutes walk away from where the tenders actually docked at the harbour. The lighthouse is basically the little pier that they docked at. Now, unbelievably, the banyan tree that the park is named after is actually 150 years old. Really fascinating that it stood the test of time. From there, I headed along Front Street, which is basically the main commercial street in Lahaina. It's a really interesting place, very picturesque, and it's got this great eclectic mix of old buildings, which have obviously been successfully reinvented to accommodate a huge variety of shops, tourist shops, art galleries, jewellery stores, and plenty of restaurants and bars. So a very lively place. As I headed back along Front Street, I came across the Baldwin House Museum. Now, while I didn't have time to go in because I had other plans for my exploration of Maui, it seemed like a really interesting place. Basically, it is the oldest house on Maui, and it was the home of a missionary who arrived to the island in, I believe, about 1840. So the interior has been restored to reflect what it would have looked like around that time. My plan after that was to head to Kanapali Beach. Now, this is one of the best known beaches on Maui. It was actually the first purpose-built beach resort as far as I understand, but leaving aside the built-up nature of it, the beach itself is quite beautiful. So I chose to get there by public bus. The bus station in Lahaina is just to the rear of Front Street, and it takes about 25 minutes. The drop-off point is Whalers Village, which is a commercial complex consisting of the usual tourist shops, Hawaiian clothing stores, and restaurants and bars and so on, as well as obviously all the hotels and condos that are along the beach. Now, for my day on the beach, I chose the option of buying myself a beach mat in an ABC store. For anybody that hasn't visited Hawaii before, ABC stores are numerous around all of the islands, and they pretty much contain everything that the holiday maker may need. So always a good place to go and get all your beach goods. Just a couple of tips if you are planning on having a beach day while you're visiting Maui. Firstly, the sand is blisteringly hot, so do make sure to pack flip-flops or water shoes. Secondly, on Kanapali Beach, there's limited shade. There are some palm trees in places, but really the vast majority of it is very open to the elements. So if you're spending any length of time, you may want to consider renting a beach umbrella from some of the concession stands. Other than that, let's talk shore excursions. Now, as you've seen, I did this on a complete DIY basis, taking the bus, buying my beach mat, and I spent a grand total of $9. Obviously, I bought lunch there as well, but we won't count that. In comparison, if I was to have taken a shore excursion, which basically offered a transfer to Kanapali Beach, and okay, it offered the comfort of a sun lounger and a transfer back, that came in at a grand total of $160. So I'll leave you to weigh that up for yourself. For me, it was a no-brainer, DIY all the way. The final activity I had planned for the evening was going to a luau. Now, the only difficulty with the scheduling of this and the fact that the ship was anchored offshore was that it meant I had to have very many more tender rides for the day. So basically, in order to get freshened up before the luau, I had to take the tender back to the ship and then take the tender back again from the ship into the harbour. Similar to the morning, the tender ride took about 10 minutes between the ship and the dock. Unfortunately, as we approached the dock on the way back in, there were two tenders which were loading up quite slowly, and we had to wait out in the water, bobbing around for about 15 minutes before being able to go in. The actual tender ride itself was also a bit of a novelty in that there were just so few passengers. That's highly unusual for any tender ride to shore. Now, I still had plenty of time to get to the luau despite the delay in getting into the dock. The luau I chose to attend is called the Feast at Lele, and it's a beachside location which is just about a 10-minute walk from the dock, so very convenient to get to. Guests on arrival are presented with beautiful floral leis and are then shown to their table on the sand. The entire evening is waiter service, and there are 5 courses, which they're basically themed around native dishes from Hawaii, from New Zealand, Samoa, Tahiti, and so on. In addition to sampling native dishes, obviously the highlight of any luau is the entertainment, and there is no shortage of that in this case. Plenty of opportunity to experience the unique song, dance, and other activities of the Pacific Islands. Overall, this was a really enjoyable experience and one that I would recommend. The performances were very good and so much symbolic of the culture of this part of the world. Now, just a few practical things to consider. In terms of the duration, it was almost 3 hours, so I think if you were perhaps attending with young children, they may get a bit restless. From my point of view, attending as a solo traveller and being at a solo table, I did find it a little bit drawn out, particularly as the food was being served and there was a lot of downtime between the entertainment. So I think perhaps other styles of luau, maybe banquet seating and buffet style, which are available at many of them, might actually suit better in some circumstances. After the luau finished, it was time to head back to the tender dock. Now, unfortunately, I had the worst timing in the world as I arrived back just as several coach loads of my fellow passengers were also returning from their shore excursions to luau's elsewhere on the island. So that meant a little bit more queuing to get on the tender than I had anticipated. The queue actually moved surprisingly quickly, and in no time at all I was on the tender for my fourth trip of the day. It was a slightly odd sensation being on a packed tender heading out to sea in the pitch blackness, but we won't dwell on that. We got there safely. Welcome back to Maui for day 2. It was wonderful to wake up this morning and look out my balcony and have this beautiful view. A really great way to start the day. After that, I headed down to, yes, you've guessed it, the tender. Despite the sunshine and blue skies, the water was a little bit choppy on the way into the dock. This didn't present any real problems, but the tender was bobbing up and down a bit, and you could see that some people were getting slightly concerned. So my plan for the day was fairly straightforward, wasn't very ambitious, planned to stay around Lahaina and explore it a bit further. Because we were scheduled to be in Maui for 2 days, I had originally considered renting a car. I do think that's the best way to see the island and just explore at your own pace, stop wherever you want, do as you please. But there were a few practical considerations. Car rental places are generally located some distance outside of Lahaina, so it would have involved taxis there and back. Plus, a major factor to consider is that really there are very, very limited overnight car parking places in Lahaina, so this would have presented real problems in renting a car for 2 days. So instead, my plan was to stay local, and in doing that I found this lovely beach area which is very close to the dock, just down past the marina, and it was so lovely to just watch people out in the water on their surfboards waiting to catch some waves. It just felt it was a real experience of true Hawaiian life. This is what people were up to on a Saturday morning, so really nice to see. After that, it was a case of further exploration around the town. Had to have some shave ice, you can't go to Hawaii and not experience that. And then did some shopping. There are outlet stores in Lahaina if you don't want to venture too far from the ship but do some shopping. They seem to prove incredibly popular with the crew. I saw many laden down heading back to the tender with their purchases. So it's the usual selection of places like Coach and Michael Kors, Gap, Skechers, that kind of thing. Obviously there are many other stores as well, and who can resist picking up souvenirs to remember the trip? For my part, I can never resist going to Christmas stores. After getting back on board in the late afternoon, it was a lazy evening for me after that. There was a farewell show in the main theatre, bearing in mind that this is technically the final night of the first leg of the cruise. It was the same comedian that had been on earlier in the sailing, so I gave that a miss. Now, because it was the final night, while most of the ship was busy packing up to get ready to disembark in the morning, it was wonderful to know that I was going to be staying on board. I've got the same cabin for the next leg of the cruise, so no packing up to be done on my part. And just a top tip for anybody booking a back-to-back, it's really essential that you do book very early on if you want to try and get the same stateroom for the 2 legs of the cruise. At least then that minimises disruption on changeover day for you. And in the blink of an eye, it's all over. We've come to the end of the 9 days on the first leg of the cruise and have arrived in Honolulu this morning. It's Sunday the 9th of October and most of the ship are preparing to disembark. For back-to-back cruisers, it's a case of meeting in the theatre to go through the procedure for our changeover. Today was my first experience of what it's like to actually be on changeover day on a back-to-back. Now this varies depending on the port, depending on the ship. In some cases, passengers doing a back-to-back will essentially be escorted off the ship so that the ship actually has a zero count before the new intake of passengers is allowed on. That wasn't the case for us. We were called to assemble in a group, we were given our sail pass cards. There were some people who were late, so it delayed the whole process, but once everyone had been accounted for on the ship, we could then disembark as we pleased. Practical things to be aware of if your ship is docking in Honolulu. There are actually two cruise piers. So Pier 1 is over by the Aloha Tower, which is the one that you saw in the photos just a few moments ago, and we docked at Pier 2. Now that is slightly closer to Waikiki, which is to the east of the cruise port. In terms of the downtown area, that is actually closer to the cruise port, but being a Sunday, really, there probably wasn't a lot going on there. And in all honesty, most visitors do tend to head towards Waikiki instead. Because I've been to Oahu on previous trips, I've pretty much explored the island at my own pace, and I've done the main attractions, I've done the historic and cultural sites around Honolulu. So really the plan for today was a fairly relaxed, just a wander around Waikiki. I had no definite plan as to how to get there. I wasn't going to walk. You'll see on screen there it's about 40 minutes just to the start of Waikiki. So it was either bus or a taxi. Conveniently, when I went outside the terminal building, it turned out that there was actually a courtesy Walmart shuttle bus, and basically that was available to take passengers to the large Walmart store that is near the Ala Moana Centre, if anybody is aware of that location. The shuttle bus took just about 10 minutes, and I did genuinely go shopping in Walmart. A girl has to replace a broken hair straightener in this humid climate, so very good timing. After that, it was a case of a leisurely stroll, cutting across by the Hilton Hawaiian Village and walking along the beach to get to the main area on Kalakaua Avenue, and some browsing of the shops there, a quick lunch, and just generally enjoying being near the beach. It was also interesting to catch up with what's gone on at the International Marketplace, which has transformed since the last time I was actually in Hawaii. Much different. The new International Marketplace in Waikiki. The banyan tree has still been retained in the centre, but all the market stalls that used to be here are now replaced by fairly high-end stores. After spending a little time relaxing on the beach, I realised all too soon that time was pressing on and I needed to start to head back to the ship. So the most cost-effective and quite efficient way to get there was by bus. Now I was down towards the end of Waikiki Beach, and basically a landmark down in that area is the Duke Kahanamoku statue. Side note, Duke Kahanamoku was a very famous Hawaiian swimmer and surfer who basically brought surfing to the popularity that it is. Now the reason for mentioning the statue is, well, firstly it's a good photo opportunity, but secondly it's also a good landmark if you're actually trying to locate the bus stop for the pink trolley. The pink trolley, sometimes it is actually a trolley, a single deck trolley, other times it's a double-decker open-top bus. But that basically does loops around Waikiki from the Ala Moana Centre all the way down Kalakaua Avenue and Beach Walk and all of those areas, and then returns via some other streets to get back to the Ala Moana Centre. The cost is just $2 one way. It is often quite busy, but luckily when I hopped on today it was actually very quiet. So it only took about 15 minutes to get back to the Ala Moana Centre, and I still had enough time at that stage to have a quick browse around. It's actually the largest shopping mall on the island, so it's got a good mix of stores and it's a good place to have a browse if you have enough time. After that, it was a case of getting the public bus back to the port. The closest bus stop is just about a 5-minute walk away. Basically, you just cross a dual carriageway and then you're quickly after that into the actual port area. So all the usual things apply. You need to show your sail pass card to actually access that area. There you can see it in the distance. Now once back on board, honestly, I was slightly shocked. The new intake of cruisers were pretty much all on board at that stage, and it was busy. The Royal Esplanade was absolutely full. It kind of felt like people were already making use of their beverage package, which was a very different feeling from the previous 9 days. On the previous sailing, I don't know, after a few days it felt like everybody just kind of found their own space on the ship. It was quiet. Obviously we were sailing under capacity. I'm not quite sure what we're sailing at on this forthcoming one for the next 20 days. But I'm certainly hoping that the busyness that I saw on the public decks this afternoon isn't going to be a thing for the next 20 days. My balcony on the port side was the perfect place to decide to have room service dinner and to watch the sunset before we set sail. It was actually dark by the time we sailed, so that's always quite an unusual and nice experience. So I've got some footage of it coming up in a few moments. It's always sad to say goodbye to the beautiful Hawaiian Islands, but in this instance I'm still looking forward to all that's to come for the rest of the cruise. Plus I also have a little stopover on the way back at the end of the cruise as well, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, just to wrap up this episode, I thought it might be useful to look for a moment at the ways that you can visit Hawaii on a cruise, because there are actually a number of different types of cruises. So there's the repositioning one that I'm on, where basically the ship is moving seasonally from West Coast states or Canada, moving across the Pacific to Australia. It'll then come back again next spring, doing the route in reverse. Visiting the Hawaiian Islands is kind of just a byproduct of that. They're en route, you get to go there. The second option is a round-trip closed-loop cruise from either of the ports in the west coast of the States or in Canada, and it's basically 5 days at sea, various different ports on the islands for about 5 days, and then the final 5 days back again at sea. And then the final one would be a 7-day round-trip itinerary that operates from Honolulu. Now that operates weekly, it's operated by Norwegian Cruise Line, and it does all of the islands. So I suppose in theory you could tack on a land-based trip onto that. So they're really all of the options, and what I would say, especially from the perspective where I've already been to Hawaii previously on land-based trips, honestly, if it is your perhaps only time to visit Hawaii, or if it's your first time, I would say that doing the repositioning cruise or doing the round-trip cruise probably isn't the best. It really doesn't give you the full perspective of what the islands are like. Having said all of that, it's by no means a criticism of this particular itinerary. I was fully aware that we had limited time on the islands when I signed up for this, and I've had a wonderful time. It was lovely to visit Maui and experience a whole new island for the past 2 days, and it was great to be back in Honolulu again today as well. So for now, as we head out to sea, and I wonder what the next 20 days will bring, it's time to say goodnight. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and hit the like button. Good night.